current evidence indicates that the central distinction is that autistic brains are characterized by particularly high levels of synaptic connectivity and responsiveness. This tends to make the autistic individual's subjective experience more intense and chaotic than that of non-autistic individuals on both the sensory motor and cognitive levels. The autistic mind tends to register more information, and the impact of each bit of that information tends to be both stronger and less predictable. Autism has been frequently misconstrued as being essentially a set of social and communication deficits. The social challenges faced by autistic individuals are simply byproducts of the intense and chaotic nature of the autistic sensory and cognitive experience.
So Andrew, we're talking about autism a lot in this series, as if everybody knows what it means. But really, how well defined is this word autism? What is it? You've talked about it a lot being simply a different neurology, a different nervous system. Can you say something a little more about what the difference is in the nervous system of an autistic and non-autistic child, and how parents would notice the difference?
Yes, Guy. Of course, because I'm not a scientist and a brain researcher, I'm always going to defer to the people who I feel like are the go-to most powerful, clearest voices on this subject. And so I'm literally going to read something that Nick Walker has written and shared. Nick Walker is a very brilliant autism self-advocate and sort of one of the leading voices of the neurodiversity movement. And I'm just going to read a couple of things because I think this nails exactly what you're asking.
Okay.
Autism is a genetically based human neurological variant. The complex set of interrelated characteristics that distinguish autistic neurology from non-autistic neurology is not yet fully understood, but current evidence indicates that the central distinction is that autistic brains are characterized by particularly high levels of synaptic connectivity and responsiveness. This tends to make the autistic individual's subjective experience more intense and chaotic than that of non-autistic individuals on both the sensory motor and cognitive levels. The autistic mind tends to register more information, and the impact of each bit of that information tends to be both stronger and less predictable.
That's really clear, isn't it? So it's like, as I understand it, you tell me if you understand it differently, that's in its many different ways, that's about sensitivity. It might be sensitivity through the sense organs. It might be sensitivity through the way that information is processed and the amount of information that there is to process. And there may be an element that's not there in the science, at least not as yet, which is around the emotional and even the empathic side. I mean, I have a sense that that's there as well, even though it's not necessarily thought of as an autistic trait. Is that what you understand by this as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what, in part what she's spotlighting, what Nick is spotlighting so clearly, is that because of these brain wiring differences that you spotlighted and the sensitivities that result. I'm going back to Nick's writing here. This means the autistic child has less attention and energy available to focus on the subtleties of social interaction. Difficulty meeting the social expectations of non-autistics often results in social rejection, which further compounds social difficulties and impedes social development. For this reason, autism has been frequently misconstrued as being essentially a set of social and communication deficits by those who are unaware that the social challenges faced by autistic individuals are simply byproducts of the intense and chaotic nature of the autistic sensory and cognitive experience.
So I'll try to translate that again, just to make it more friendly language. You tell me if I've got it right. I think he's saying that because of all of this additional brain activity that happens in the autistic brain, processing information, processing sensory information, and so on, there's less energy left to, and there's less space because they're so depleted by all of that that's information processing to focus on. I mean, he said social interaction, but I think it's worth making the distinction here because I don't think it's social interaction that autistic people have the problem with. And there have been studies, and we've talked about this in one of the earlier episodes, where autistic people have an equal social instinct and an equal social ability to non-autistic people. It's just that the social norms are different. So when you get two autistic people together, they interact socially just as well as two autistic people, non-autistic people. But it's when you get the mix that there are difficulties between them because they're not understanding each other. And it's not that the autistic person doesn't have the energy for social interaction, because I think they do. It's that they don't have the additional energy that would be required to accommodate a form of interaction that's not their native form.
I think that's so perfectly said, Guy. And I think part of the way that I understand this now, and the way that I believe the field needs to shift, is that the responsibility then for making sure that good communication and effective interaction and then strong relationships, right, to make sure that they develop between autistic and non-autistic people is a shared responsibility. It is just as much my responsibility to adjust what feels like my normal or natural way of communicating and interacting as a neurotypical person or a non-autistic person. I have to pay just as much attention to that and learn some things, for example, about giving someone that I'm interacting with who's autistic perhaps more space and time to either initiate something, communicate something to me, or respond to something I've said, than I typically might in my default mode as a non-autistic person. And that's my responsibility.
As much as it is the autistic person's.
Absolutely. And I think what we've done, Guy, is we've put all of the responsibility and all of the onus on this on autistic people, and it makes absolutely no sense.
And it's because of a perception that you talk about often, which is that autism is seen as being an impairment.
Yes.
And so if it's an impairment, then how can anybody possibly make up for an impairment? However, if it's not seen as an impairment, if it's just seen as a different neurology, then why wouldn't we take equal responsibility?
Absolutely, Guy. And I think again, Nick Walker says it best. She says, ultimately, to describe autism as a disorder represents a value judgment rather than a scientific fact.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Good. And so if we're saying that the central characteristic really, and it might manifest differently in each person, but the central unifying characteristic of autism that means that I'm autistic and someone else is autistic, what I would have in common with another autistic person is this rapid neural activity that takes energy, and it's not. It takes energy, but it's not that it doesn't give anything either. It gives a richness of perception that wouldn't otherwise be there, but it takes away bandwidth for other things. And if we understand that, and if a parent understands that, and if a teacher understands that, how can they then use that information to best support the child?
I think that's probably the most important question to reframe what it is that I, as a non-autistic person, that, what is my responsibility in terms of how I approach all of my interactions with autistic children, teens, adults, young adults, whatever it might be. I think it comes down to it is my responsibility to have a very heightened awareness of the expectations that I'm carrying into a social interaction about what I want the other person to do as they're interacting with me. I have to be very aware of that I'm expecting a certain kind of set of facial expressions. I'm expecting a certain kind of eye contact response from people, and that's not necessarily a fit with the person that I'm interacting with. I have to be much more accommodating, much more comfortable if someone doesn't look directly at me and they're having a conversation with me, or if someone's not immediately, facing their full body towards me, or that someone is has a big smile painted on their face. That if I'm looking for those cues from someone I'm interacting with, I'm actually putting an enormous amount of pressure on that person to interact and communicate in ways that might not be natural for them. And I think this goes back to sort of an understanding of that people who focus on the label is cross-cultural communication, right? That anyone, any person that's had to learn how to interact or communicate across cultures with people, right? Interact and communicate with people that are either speaking a different language or have a very different style, way of engaging and interacting face to face, have had to do that. I've had to be very sensitive and very in the moment, very, very non-attached to how they're being received in an interaction and what their expectations are. I think we have a long way to go to really ask that of non-autistic people, and I think it's necessary. And it means I've got to get out of my comfort zone.
I got interviewed by somebody recently about autism, and a subject came up about, it was about feeling accepted and stuff like that. And one thing came up was that there have been times in my life when I felt very accepted for who I am by people who are not autistic, and that's been when I've been traveling. So it's interesting you brought that up, and met with other people who are traveling. And when you are in that traveling mode, you're just in a more open frame of mind, aren't you? Because you know you're going to be meeting people from other cultures. You know you're going to be meeting people who don't react to things in the same way that you do. You know that the way, maybe the tone of voice, or the way that somebody looks, or the amount that they smile, isn't going to carry the same significance as it does in your little village. You're prepared for all of those things. And so we came up with this term, the traveler's mindset, that if we could, if we could have more of that, if we could bring ourselves to that sort of understanding, not just for the autistic children, it's good for anybody, because it might be that autism isn't the only, autism and non-autistic are not the only neurological types. I'm sure there are many more that, and by having this mindset, we'd be much more accommodating to everybody.
I couldn't agree more, Guy. Yeah, I love the traveler's mindset as a frame. I think that's beautiful.